I thought I would start by showing you images of my practice of previous work, just to kind of give you some context for what you're seeing on the walls here. My background is in textiles, so a lot of the work that I make comes out of this engagement with those hand-making traditions, and the work then also tends to reference textiles in form, process, pattern, any number of things. I've been working for, I want to say like the last 12, 13, maybe longer years with collecting defunct transmission materials, so data cables, Ethernet wires, component parts that have been used at some point in telecommunications infrastructure. So those are the main materials that I've been working with for some time now, and then I collect them from junkyards. Sometimes people donate them to me, and then I repurpose them into 2D and 3D forms. So some of what you're seeing is coming out of this sort of long-term engagement with those materials. And the draw to the materials is really this kind of excitement about thinking about the former role of a lot of these materials in transmission and communication and providing this kind of connection. We often don't think of the sort of physical infrastructure, the physical materials that provide all of these ways for us to connect. And to me, that's fascinating to really think about the materiality of these things and be able to bring them into new compositions. So that's the sort of inspiration. And that's grounded in like the interest in the materials and the interest in textiles comes from wanting to kind of make work, I guess, that bridges or that is an intersection between textiles and technology, and thinking about textile making, textile practice, textiles in general, especially woven practices, as the earliest form of technology or early technological practice. So that's kind of what fuels a lot of the work for me. So I started, can you see if I'm standing here? I don't know. There's some seats if folks want to come and sit down. I'm actually starting with an image of the last piece I made or finished making before I came out here. It's called Pile It On, and it's made from lots and lots and lots of Ethernet jackets. So I remove all of the wires that are inside. So they're empty jackets that are folded and inserted into mesh. And I include all the component parts that come with the wires, because often when I go to the junkyard, there's lots of, like, there's tape, there's markings, there's clues that indicate where they came from and what they were used in. So I leave all those things in as an extra sort of, I guess, as a signal of like where they came from, right, of their function. And then on the back, I insert them from the back to the front. So the front looks like a sort of like a shag rug. And then the back sort of maps out a different kind of pattern. So the folded jackets are held in place by like a heat shrink cap, and those caps form their own sort of pattern from the back. So it's the pattern on the front is the pattern on the back, but it becomes a very different experience. These are some images from a show with a gallery in Vancouver called Moni Clark, and this is from my most recent show with them, where I had two of those large empty cable forms, and then some bronze work, some wire work. So I'll just sort of go through those images so you can see the different examples. This is another one of these hanging works. I should say that the coloration of these things is really dictated by what I'm able to collect. So if I'm able to find this first one, for months and months and months, all I could get was blue and white. And I was like, all right, looks like I'm making a piece that's blue and white. And then prior to that, I had found quite a number of yellows and greens and blacks and like lot more variation. And even within each of the colors that I am able to collect, there's always a tonal difference. There's no two blues or no two yellows that are the same, so it creates a lot of variation in the work. And so from the back, what you're seeing in terms of the pattern, it sort of forms these topographical lines or sort of signals, waveforms, things like that, that really are following the shift in color on the front of the work. So it sort of forms its own pattern. That's a detail. So in the, I guess, bottom left-hand part, it's all of the plugs that are left on the cables that are left left in place. This is the first one I made, which I thought was going to be a purple piece, but then I discovered that purple is actually quite unique in terms of Ethernet cable, and so thus the transition into different shades of lilac, blue, turquoise, etc. That's a detail of that. And then from the back, a very similar approach where the lines are mapping out the color shifts on the front of the work. I also mentioned in the beginning I work with telecom wires, which have a sort of very different presence than and function than the Ethernet wires. And so a good chunk of my work is focused on making these two-dimensional, more image-based works. In this case, I work with images of the night sky, and then I run them through a glitching software, so it rearranges the composition, it sort of breaks it up and glitches it, and then that's what I render with wire. So the wire is similar to the pieces that are on the wall over there. They're very thin, and so I lay down the wire side by side, and I cut and splice the wires in place following the pattern or following the image. So there's lots of breaks, and it's hard to tell in the image, but the wires are copper core, so when I cut the wire and assemble them, there's like some glitter from the exposed copper that comes into play as well. Some sculptural work, so sort of extending from this two-dimensional plane into 3D, and thinking about how this accumulation of wire can sort of become this more sedimentary form. So I don't have any images of the back, but there's a sort of bronze-coated backing, so it's a good back is also exposed. The lengths of wire, they're sort of all hitting the ground. The ends are stripped similar to some of the works on the wall there. So you really get this sense of vitality or liveness of the piece, even though it's very unusual because it's obviously not a work that's plugged in. There's no actual connectivity, but it feels very vibrant. And in this case, I'm using all of the colors that come, the telecom wires come in a lot of different colors that have matching pairs. And so using all the colors together sort of allows for a kind of visual vibration to happen, so the piece does feel like it's in motion. It's a detail of that. And then a couple years ago, I started making bronze work. And part of the inclination to bronze was thinking about all this material that I've been working with is all copper core. And bronze is essentially 97% copper with other alloys added to it. And I thought, well, it'd be really nice, it makes sense as a transition to sort of work from the inside out. So to work with the interior of the cable as a material on its own. So that's sort of what led me to making these bronze work. Again, similar parts, so telephone insulators and other cables, adapters, things like that. Some that are, most of which are sort of no longer functional, some of which still are. And then sort of pairing them together so they become, they're sort of these assemblages that are all placed on pattern grounds that are made up of Ethernet wires. Some of the component parts are real, some are not real, like there's a iPhone plug right there. These other parts I just kind of in the wax stage, I'm splicing things together that don't belong, so I'm generating like new parts out of them. So, been very interested in this commemorative, the historical and traditional commemorative capacity of bronze and what that means working with these sort of defunct materials. Can they still transmit? Are they still sending signals out? So that was the logic of the title Ghost Repeater, things that are still kind of echoing even though they're technically no longer functional. Although I have to say that things being cast in bronze, some of these parts are now would be considered superconductive as opposed to not given the material translation. This is a previous sculpture from the first show of Monty Clark a couple years ago, more than a couple years ago now. Again, taking the same grouping of telecom wires, and similar to the work that's here, stripping the ends and twisting them together so it actually creates one continuous line that maps out the contour of this form. It's a 4-piece stacked form that's hollow on the inside. And again, similar to the other sculptural work, there's this strange sort of sense of humanness to it. It feels like it's hair, it feels bodily, and it also has a strange, because of the combination of colors, it tends to feel like it's vibrating even though nothing's actually moving. And then I threw in a couple of some older work. These are a series of hanging silicone works that are inspired by pieced quilts. So I'm borrowing patterns from quilt making traditions and then kind of recasting them in silicone. So you can see that similar to the bronze work where the ground is, or the surface texture is all mapped out with Ethernet wires, and then I'm hand brushing different colors of pigmented silicone into the mold in order to create the silicone casts, and then they're all secured together. So you can see hanging in space, again, they're two-sided works, so you get a real sense of the piece quality from the back as well, because despite my intention to try to color match, every time I mix color, it always ends up a slightly different color. So I embrace that kind of, I guess you could call it a glitch, which is sort of quite common in my work, and making it part of the composition. And then this is my last slide. This is just another example of borrowing some of the language of quilt making and patterning that comes from textiles and kind of remixing it into this new form. So that's the practice, and so now I thought I would just sort of talk a little bit about the stuff that's in here, and of course I should have said this at the beginning. If you have any questions, like shout them out. That's totally fine with me.
I have a question. The works you first showed, and they're floating in the space, and you said the front and the back.
Yeah. Not really, but yeah.
What?
Yeah,
why?
that's a good question. I think I've become kind of, maybe as a way to, for ease of description, I kind of say front and back, when in reality, when it's a spatial experience, you could encounter one or the other, and there's no real order to it, or no real like hierarchy in terms of what you need to see first.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the backs, when
Yeah.
you say front or back and back, it seems to create some kind of hierarchy
Right.
about how you read them, and
Yeah.
it seems to me that the backs are as interesting,
Yeah, absolutely.
And as relevant as the fronts.
They are. I think I've adapted my language just for like, okay, here you go, here's this and here's that. But you're quite right, it is actually, you could view it from any which way, and that would be just as important as any other, so, yeah. Okay, so the stuff that's in here, when I was getting ready to come out here, I had a couple of thoughts, and one was thinking about things that were sort of more portable that I could bring with me that I could then kind of use and try to work with differently than I normally would in my studio at home. And I'm saying this because I didn't really have an understanding of what the desert is or what it feels like, so I kind of packed some things and thought, okay, let's just see when I get here what it's actually like. And now, of course, I'm here. I shouldn't say completely, I understand the magic that brings people here. It's pretty amazing. So in the first set of works, I had been making, this is sort of taking an older series that's been ongoing for many years now, and thinking about how I could make these pieces more specific to here, to the landscape here. And so in previous works, I was working more with trying to articulate textile patterns like a chevron pattern or something like that, or a waveform, some kind of signal. And then I thought, well, how can I talk about some of the landscape I'm seeing here, and like how would that translate into a different kind of signal? So on all of the hikes that I've been doing, of course, there's all these amazing rock formations. And so I took some pictures. I've actually taken about 500 pictures by now. I had to be selective. And so what you're seeing in terms of this line work is each one has a contour of a different rock formation, and then I'm basically following that line as I'm trying to match up the dashes on the wire. So the wire sort of itself starts to map out that contour. to me, it looks one way when I'm making it, and then when I see it, it's, you know, there's lots of glitches and there are things that are mismatched and there's different coloration because of the different wires used. So it kind of becomes more signal, but signal that's based on landscape, and it's kind of a, in some ways real, in some way imagined kind of signal, but it is based on the formations that I've seen here. And then this, just in terms of process for those who are curious, these, when they come in telecom cables, there's lots and lots of pairings. There's usually a white and green that has its complement with like green on white, white on green. So I removed all the colors and just kept the white ones, and part of the logic was thinking around making a textile sample and having like a unified ground so that the colored line would really sort of pop out. And that's also the logic for having the kind of, I guess, fringe at the top and the bottom, again, thinking about like a smaller textile sample. And they're glued onto canvas, so they're not sewn on, so they're just placed side by side. And then the work here is quite different. This is all made of Ethernet wires, so it's a combination of Cat5 and Cat6 wires. When I was packing to come here, I was trying to imagine the light and the sort of color systems that are here, so all the like range of browns and oranges that are in like the rocks, the sky, the sort of the greenery, the vegetation, like how I could try to speak to that through the coloration of these wires. And it happens that from making all of those large cable pieces, because had to remove all the wires, I have bins and bins and bins of all of this wire. And of course I have to do something with it. So that was the exercise for coming here. So like, okay, what can I do? What can I do with these? And I picked these ones out specifically because most Cat5 and Cat6 wires, they have a color system. So it's like, there's blue, there's green, there's orange, and there's brown. But they're usually quite standard in terms of the color. But these ones are special because they have a kind of overall copper tone to them. They have a different coloration than all of the other wires, so I separated them out. I separate those ones out when I'm pulling everything apart. And so I thought that those ones would somehow be suited for here, and hopefully, the thinking was hopefully I could do something that it would sort of match the experience of the light and the landscape here. So when I brought them here, I'd already removed the jackets. I unspun some of them and then respun them together so I could get a bit more of a gradient. And then I twisted the stripped ends together like I've done in previous work so that it feels like a continuous line that's kind of weaving its way back and forth across the canvas. And this one is all sewn onto the canvas, unlike these ones which are glued. And then over here, this is kind of a strange corner over here. A couple of things, they're just some sort of experiments, and you can see the raw material and some other inspirational things over here. When I got here, I went antiquing first of all, because there's so many good spots to do that. And I picked up a couple of telephone insulators, which I really love. And I was like, okay, great, I can do something different with those. And then I went to the swap meet, and I found this unit, which is really strange and wonderful, potentially scary, I'm not sure. It's decommissioned military testing and measuring equipment. So with a minimal dive online, I discovered that it's a piece of equipment that's intended to basically measure and analyze signals and find errors in transmission signals, primarily used for aviation. That's as much as I'll say now because I haven't done a deep enough dive to tell you more about it, except that I got a really good deal on it and it was really exciting because the interfaces were really cool. And I was like, oh, this is really like how unusual to find something that has to do with like errors and finding glitches and testing signal efficacy, which is like something I'm just interested in general in my own work. So I played around with it, and then I started casting some of the telephone insulators in concrete just because I was curious to see what what that translation would be like. And then from that, I started kind of taking the cast piece of concrete and kind of like making this mound form, thinking about like how we bury old technology, how that's sort of like in the ground that we stand on, and just sort of made this small test piece and put it on top of the unit. So right now it's an experiment. I don't know what's gonna come of it, but I feel like it's planted a seed for further exploration when I get back to Vancouver, and potentially if I'm able to get this stuff back there and also see if I can get it to work, which would also be something. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah, and then there's just some wire and some other stuff on the table that came out of that experimentation. So that's one of the more exciting things about being here is sort of seeing how this place inspired me to adapt things that I thought I already knew, but then I discovered a lot more stuff on the way. And then planting seeds for some future works that'll hopefully come to fruition once I'm back in Vancouver, or hopefully when I come back here next, because I'm quite committed now to coming back to Joshua Tree. So yeah, I hope I haven't rambled on and on and on.
Great, thank you. Thank you again for being here. A couple of things I missed up front. Several of the installations from the Joshua Tree are still up. If you go around the back, you'll see some of the most prominent. And then if you go along into the rocks, and there are catalogs over here that can help you decipher them. And also for anybody who's local, San Culsa over here is collecting signatures to try and get an ally of ours into Congress. So please see her for that support. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
There's plenty of snacks and drinks and whatever back there.
Coming up at the end of the month.